Hello, my name is Monica Goucher, and this presentation is on lesson study. Initially developed in Japan to improve teachers' knowledge of content and instruction, it has gained attention in the United States since the mid 2000s. So the format of a lesson study begins with forming a team that is usually 4 to 6 members that are focused on a common topic. In the team, you determine how often you'll be meeting, what the agenda will be for each meeting, as well as setting the norms. After that, you want to set your professional goals. And this is going to be based again on the common topic, but also based on reading and discussion of the professional literature that is focused on the topic that the team chooses. The group will set goals for the work that they do in their lesson studies. Thirdly, you want to set some student development goals. These goals are for student growth that are based on both the standards and the data that will be collected. After that, is time to plan the research lesson. So, using professional resources, the group will create a research lesson, essentially a laboratory. They're going to use research articles, which will add to their thinking as they begin to plan this lesson. They may even build it from a past lesson, taking a lesson that has worked in the past and adding new information to it based upon the research articles. They will also consider the student's perspective. As a student, what would work? What would be confusing? As well as identifying skills that students will need to have in order to accomplish this lesson. And finally, they want to make sure that the lesson is aligned with the student goals, the student development goals that have been set. Next is time to teach the research lesson. So one member of the group teaches the research lesson while all the others stand around and observe. The observer's job is to collect predetermined specific data from the students. So in the planning process, they determine what kind of data they want to collect. And then during the teaching of the lesson, the observers collect that data. There is no interference between the observers and the students. The observer's job is just to watch the students and collect the data. After the lesson, there is a debriefing session where each observer will reflect on the data they collected and organize it in order to share with the group. The teacher that taught the lesson shares a reflection of how they thought the lesson went, including strengths, changes that happened in the moment, any surprises, and evidence of the goals that were met from the teacher's perspective. After that, the observers share their data based on the intended student growth goal. Individual members will share their data that is relevant to those goals. And finally, as a group, they will draw conclusions. They will discuss, analyze the data, and conclude if the goals were met based upon that data. At that point, the process repeats again. They may decide to do a similar research lesson, but with a different teacher and changing some of the aspects that from their observational data appeared to be incomplete or maybe not meeting the student growth goals. They will repeat this process each time, tinkering and changing that research lesson until they begin to see uh, evidence from the data that they are beginning to reach their student growth goal. Some of the main features of of the lesson study are this is long-term professional development. This is not a one and done. This is something that you would start at the beginning of the year with one group of people, and it would continue throughout a school year. It is teacher led, so there are no professionals being brought from the outside. The teachers are ones that decide what their content is going to be focused on. They decide, they find the research, they do the discussions, they create the lessons, and they analyze the data afterwards. It is team based. So there is no one person who's in charge and the other follows. It is all everybody working together as a team. As an inquiry cycle, everything that's done has a question attached to it. The teachers are constantly going to be asking why the data ended up that way, what factors went into that data, how they could have changed the lesson in order to improve the data that they received based on the professional literature and the research articles that they read. There is a focus on the content knowledge as well as the pedagogy. So the teachers have to not only know their content, they also have to know the best practices in instruction in order to make sure that the students are receiving that content. And also, there is a focus on observational data. You're not looking at test scores, you are actually watching the students. You're taking notes on the actions that they're taking, the words that they are saying, and then based on that is where they draw their conclusions and their inferences and then make their changes in their research lessons in order to produce the data that would help them to reach their student growth goal. The most effective place classes that this has been shown to work in is in math and science, because in math and science, a lot of the focus is on problem solving and student discussions of solutions and strategies. So, using lesson study in a math and science class is effectively doing the same thing. They're trying to solve a problem through research, both in reading research and also conducting research themselves. Also, the data that they receive is focused on the student and not the teacher. In fact, the data that the observers take is from the students. It doesn't include anything about the teacher. It improves a teacher's content knowledge as well as their instructional strategies. As the group reads the professional literature and the research articles, they gain a deeper understanding of the content as well as the instruction that is best for teaching that content. And from this process, it has been shown that teacher efficacy improves because teachers have greater knowledge of their content and greater knowledge of the instructional strategies that are best practices. They feel more confident in their teaching abilities. It is goal oriented because they create the student growth goal and then they are constantly working towards meeting that goal. Sometimes groups may realize that the goal that they had written originally is not something that can be observed and notated through the data. So that teaches them that they need to change their goals to make them either more specific or more measurable. And it is cyclical. It is not a one and done. They repeat the process throughout the time period in order to revise, improve, and get better with each research lesson. The challenges for this type of study is that it doesn't always create a deeper learning for teachers. There are opportunities to create deeper learning, but sometimes teachers don't take advantage of those. Or perhaps a teacher has great experience in the content area, therefore, they may not gain any deeper learning than what they already have. Also, there has been very little research about how teachers develop from the initial stage of the lesson study to the more experienced stages. There's been research that shows how it helps the novice teachers, but not necessarily the growth between the novice to the experienced stage. It takes time. It takes time to have the meetings, to read the research, to plan the research lesson, then taking time out of the classroom to observe a lesson, analyze the data, come up with the conclusions, and then revise to do it again. As was mentioned before, this is a long term professional development, usually covering the course of an academic year. And along with that comes the funding, the cost that is involved with hiring substitutes to cover all the teachers in a team for every one of the research lessons. Plus, there may be unclear vision for the data collection. If the goal is not specific enough, the collection of the data may not be specific enough. Therefore, the growth goal might not seem to be met just because the data that was collected was not the correct kind of data. The best time to use this type of study would be for a group of teachers that are willing to collaborate with one another and focus on a single topic. You want to have a team that are willing to work together, that are willing to invite other teachers into their classroom to observe, and when they have an academic year, when you're actually in the classroom in order to do these observations on a regular basis. At my school, Enumclaw High School, I feel like this type of study would be best in our math department right now because currently our math department has introduced a new type of um, instructional practice called non permanent vertical spaces. And in this practice, students are placed in groups, they're given math problems, and then they literally get out of their seats. They stand in front of a whiteboard, and in their group, they are talking through the problem, trying to collaboratively work through it together. I feel like the lesson study would be a great opportunity for those math teachers to really get into the data about this type of instructional practice, really get into the research, read about it, and kind of do some of those research lessons to make this type of instructional practice even better to help them meet their growth goals. It could also be used in other content areas, such as in English content, science, or social studies, especially if you're focusing on skills that are needed in those classes and not necessarily content. So while our social studies teachers teach up to 10 different content areas, such as world history, military history, pop, pop culture, and American history, the skills that are required in a history class are the same. So, really focusing on the research about teaching those skills in a social studies or history type class, I feel like would be um, really good for those content areas. It also might be interesting to see this in something that is more interdisciplinary, meaning a variety of content areas that are focused on something like blended learning, where you are trying to include instruction through digital technology. So, really trying to come together and come up with the research behind blended learning and understanding it, and then creating lessons in our individual content areas, but um, the practices in blended learning would be the same regardless of the content. Thank you for listening to this presentation about the lesson study.